Hi, welcome back to another episode of Nobody's Doing It Right, the podcast for those who are uncertain. My name is Kat. I'm your host. For today's episode, we're going to talk about how if you fixate on people, it might be because people are the safest projects for you when you're feeling directionless in life. Okay, so this isn't to shame anybody who lacks direction. It can be very difficult to know what your direction is, to even decide on a direction, because life is stressful and we have so much pressure on ourselves to figure out what we're going to do immediately and from the age of 17, whatever, and know what you're going to do for the rest of your life. Like, that's a lot of pressure. That's very difficult. So, of course, it makes sense that many of us struggle with direction. I lose my direction a lot, and so there's nothing wrong with that. There's no shame here. It's just a matter of when you do lose direction, because I think it will happen from time to time, we have to reevaluate our path. We have to reevaluate what we're doing, why we're doing it. And sometimes that means feeling directionless for a little bit, because maybe you've done something and you've achieved it. And now you're like, okay, so now what? What do I do now? Right? So there are moments even in good situations where you might be directionless. I think when that happens, when you experience that feeling of directionlessness, to recognize when you are using something else to help give you direction, rather than sitting down with yourself and doing the hard thing, which is having those honest conversations and saying, okay, I've lost direction, now what? Because that can be really, really tough and it's overwhelming, it's stressful, so I understand. But sometimes we might use other things to fill that space, to fill that void, to distract us from it, to give us purpose and direction when we should be focusing on actually something different. And sometimes that might be people. That could be people in your life who require a lot of your energy. Maybe they are shrouded in chaos all the time, and you might be a fixer who's able to step in and solve problems for them, Or it might be in romantic relationships where you might be hyper fixated on a person who maybe there's some like unrequited love there, or the person's an avoidant and they're not fully in, or it just can't happen right now. And you might be so fixated on making it work, maybe because you're lacking a sense of direction in your life, and people sometimes are the best projects to make you feel purposeful again. That's really difficult to accept if you are like me and are a fixer. That's something that I've noticed about myself. It I think ties into your childhood conditioning. So definitely look into that as well if you have a therapist. If not, there are so many resources online. But if you have been conditioned to be somebody whose purpose lies in fixing others, helping others, being there, being convenient for others, in moments of directionlessness in your life, you might lean into that. You might fall back into people being your projects, because that's easy, right? It's easy to find somebody who needs fixing in whatever way, or needs your attention, so that you can gain some sense of purpose again. Now, obviously, this isn't always a bad thing. There's no 100% in anything. It can be good because sometimes our relationships do require work. Sometimes cultivating a strong, healthy relationship with somebody is a great project to invest in. Why not, right? Just like you would with a child. If you have a child, investing a lot of your time and energy, your purpose in helping that child grow, of course. So there's nothing wrong with putting that into relationships. I do think it can get a bit dangerous and destructive if you are using it as a way to distract yourself from really understanding what your purpose is, or what feels more aligned with you. It can feel comfortable to find that in other people, because people give you validation, people can give you approval. Sometimes even their lack of approval gives you more purpose and drive to keep working harder so that you can get it, right? So there's more feedback, in a sense, that can continue to motivate you to do this. But when it comes to other things, other projects, other endeavors, you might not see a return very quickly, and it might take time for you to really build up the foundation of it before you see any sort of answer to your question of, okay, is this my direction? Is this my purpose? Is this right for me? It takes time, right? And you have to be able to live and sit in that discomfort and uncertainty. But with people as your projects, you don't always have to do that. And it can be very satisfying and fulfilling at times, and fun to hyperfixate on a person. And I mean this specifically when it comes to romantic partnerships, because obviously I talk about relationships. I've talked about limerence in the past. I've talked about using other people to make you feel like a valid person in yourself. And this is part of that. Sometimes we might look at people and see them as our project, because sometimes via proxy, we can make them, or this situation with them, who we ultimately want to be, instead of turning around and looking at ourselves and putting that energy and time directly into ourselves so that we can understand what our direction is. It's easier and more fun sometimes to do that through another person. So if you find yourself constantly in limerence, potentially, constantly seeking out relationships or hyperfixating on chaos in people's lives, or always trying to fix things for people, or always finding yourself in situations where your connection to somebody else is creating a lot of stimulus in your life that is taking your energy and attention away from the things that you maybe deep down know you should be focusing on. If you find that, that might be you feeling that lack of directionlessness and using people, in a sense, to fill that void. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to use people for that purpose, because the void will always be there. So even if you are using this person to fill it, it will inevitably need more, or it won't be sustainable long term. You'll have to find another person, another thing to keep filling that void, rather than just looking it dead in the eye and facing it and saying, okay, I feel directionless right now. I feel like there's nothing going on. I feel empty. What do? Sometimes there's nothing you can do other than sit in it and let yourself sit in that feeling of, okay, I don't have direction right now. And this is kind of veering onto another topic, but I think it's still tied into this, so I want to bring it up. But it's in those moments when you accept, okay, I don't have direction right now. It's in those moments when you can actually tap into your intuition a lot better. It's in that acceptance of, I don't know, where you invoke your intuition to step in and say, I do. This is it. This is what the next step is. And having to listen to it and trusting it. But if you don't trust it, if you don't trust yourself, you don't trust your inner knowing, you might end up circling back to those chaotic relationships, chaotic partnerships, whatever, people that you need to convince to love you to avoid facing that intuitive answer that you got that might not feel right, because it's, it might be scary, it might be uncomfortable, it might push you out of your comfort zone, right? So I think it's really important to think about these things if you notice yourself attaching to people too much, especially when you notice it in moments in your life where you're in a transitionary period, when you've achieved something, and now you're in the space of, okay, now what? I have to do something. Sometimes you don't have to do anything. Sometimes you have to sit in the space of not doing, and that's it. That's what you have to do. But if you are maybe even more a type A person, or like a fixer, like I said, or a doer all the time, that'll feel really uncomfortable. So you'll find something else. You'll find a different project to attach to give you that sense of purpose, that sense of direction. When sometimes you just have to sit in that directionlessness and let yourself just understand with time what your next step is. And you will know. You'll give yourself an answer eventually, but you need space to do that. You need some clarity to get that insight from yourself. But obviously you can't create that space if you are constantly distracting yourself with other people, if you are using other people to make you feel purposeful. And that's not emotionally healthy for you. And it's also not good for the other people as well, because it's not an authentic connection with somebody. It is rooted in your inner wounds, right? Your unhealed wounds. It is rooted in your lack of self-awareness at times. Again, this isn't to shame anybody, because I think we all do it to an extent. It's just having the awareness, just understanding that might be what's happening, so that you can take a step back and say, okay, clearly this is not where my energy should be going right now, or where I feel comfortable with it going, because obviously we don't like the term should all the time. They can put a lot of pressure on ourselves, but I don't feel comfortable with my energy going in this direction, yet I feel pulled to it constantly from this fear-based response of, I'm not good enough if I'm not constantly doing, so I have to be doing something. And right now that is me turning people into projects. I don't feel comfortable with that. So let me sit in the equally uncomfortable directionlessness that I've been feeling and see what happens. That's really tough. Don't get me wrong. It's not easy. It's easier said than done. But sometimes that's what we have to do. So if you catch yourself being in that headspace, if you catch yourself turning people into projects, ask yourself, is there a discomfort here? Is there a void that I'm avoiding facing? That might be exactly what you need to do, so that you can understand what your next step is. Because I get, it can feel scary. It can feel like you are losing your footing and your grounding when you don't have direction, but you know what your next step is. You know what your direction is. You just have to let yourself hear it. You have to let yourself understand it, but there won't be mental space for you to do that if you are distracting yourself with projects in the form of people. I hope this was helpful. I hope it was informative. I hope it gave you a different perspective on this topic. If you want to work with me one-to-one, you can book a call and we can talk about these things in more detail. If you want to follow my Substack, you can do that as well. I write personal essays on these topics. And you can follow my social media for all of my other content. Other than that, thank you for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another episode.